Thank you very much for that. Extremely kind introduction. I think like everyone who first had the book brought to their attention, it is an intriguing juxtaposition. Singapore, corporate lawyer, a distant village on the shores of Northern Lake, as we've just heard on the borders of Yunnan, and this mosaic of peoples. And which becomes a long relationship, and I'm very intrigued as to what you brought to them and what they brought to you, and that's what we're going to explore. So you got tired of corporate life, I understand. What was so bad about it?
I have to be careful because my old boss
there's nothing they can do anymore.
I think it's all unhappy lawyers, and lawyers are unhappy. Say, we just work too hard, don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, 69 days are normal, you know, and it goes on and on. I mean, it's just only so long you can do that, isn't it? All these nodders are previous lawyers.
They're all recovering lawyers. So.
Yeah.
So you decided to, you were very young for early retirement, I have to say, but you took early retirement and you became a recovering lawyer. And this, your kind of program for recovery included traveling in China, writing about China. You could have picked anywhere. You know, why China? Why did you decide to travel in China?
My whole family, we've been living in Singapore and Malaysia for the last 2 generations. Nobody has gone back to find grandfather's village. So that was the first order of the day.
Which was when
I retired,
where was the village?
So I see in Guangdong province, I'm Cantonese, you know. And really it was the back of an envelope that my grandmother had from my grandfather, and there was a little address on it, you know. And I went with this envelope to Guangdong province. And it's a very long story, I won't bore you with it, but it took me months to find that tiny little village, still poor, still farming, and making that connection, and seeing the piece of land that my grandfather had built. And when my father and his two brothers were born, before they all uprooted themselves to Malaysia. So that was fun. And they asked me whether I wanted to rebuild my home on that
family.
Yes, you know, even though I was a woman. Now, don't forget, my village would have been very patriarchal, very Chinese, but I think they sort of accepted me as the only true representative to have ever surfaced, right? So they accorded me some respect. It would have been better if I. But nevertheless,
probably nothing to be done about that at this point.
That's right. So on my third visit, when I finally confirmed that it's all correct, do you know, I went there late, and then I arrived at the village gate, right, and there was this big red banner saying, "Welcome back, Sister Waihong, you know, to the village." And the lion dance troupe, made up of 70-year-old men who are still like this. And they waited 2 hours for me. And when I came through the gate, the drums started and they danced a welcome line dance for me. It was really touching.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you didn't adopt that village, you adopted a
different
village.
Because it was, the architecture was boring. There was no lake in front of the village, you know what I mean? But I do go back sort of every 2-3 years just to keep the relations going, you know. But
in fact, you say in your book that it was reading an article in a travel magazine.
Yes.
Now there are hundreds of travel magazines, thousands of articles. You read an article about the
Goddess Festival.
Right.
Right.
The Goddess Festival of the Mosuo people in Honolulu. And was it just another festival you wanted to see? Was there something that particularly intrigued you about this?
Well, the fact that there is the goddess, you know, is was kind of intriguing. I mean, you know, I've read all the sort of normal books on goddesses, you know, in the bookshelf, yes, you know. And I thought it'd be nice to meet a goddess, you know.
Right. The goddess is in fact a mountain in this occasion.
Yes, a mountain goddess. And in fact, when I finally built my house there, the mountain goddess is right in front of my terrace.
Right.
You know.
So now we have to understand how you get from reading an article in a travel magazine about a festival, which is very jolly, you go off there and you visit, to building a house opposite the mountain goddess. There's a little bit of filling in there that we need. What was it about that village that so compelled you when you're...
Actually, as I say in the book, it all happened by chance. You know, I go to the festival, I meet a family, and I meet two young kids, teenagers, and they adopted me rather than me adopting them, right? So they call me godmother, Gamma in Chinese, and they invite me to their home. And I go and the parents are thinking, who is this? How come she's invited? Because they haven't told their parents, you know. And anyway, we sort of had a meal or two. And then they said, come back and visit us, right? In the new year. So, you know, true to my word, I was still a lawyer then. I go back next Chinese New Year. And then their uncle said, do you want to build a house? I mean, it's really this casual as that. You know, hey, would you like a cup of tea? Would you like to build a house? And when I said, how much? You know, one has to ask, like, building a house, how much? And he said, 50,000 yuan, 5,000 pounds. I mean, can I buy a bicycle, electric bicycle with that? And I said, well, it was 5,000 pounds. You know, yeah, go for it.
That does sound like the easiest encounter with a builder that I've ever had. Don't ever try and build in London. You wouldn't like it.
In fact, the whole building process, I didn't have a hand in it.
Right. So they clearly wanted you to go live with it.
Right.
But okay, I think at this point, for those who are not familiar with Mosuo culture and who these people are and where they might have come from, can you just sketch for us, you know, they speak a language which is not Mandarin, they have, as I understand it, the kind of layered set of religions in which Tibetan Buddhism plays a part, but so does the kind of older animist traditions and maybe a little bit of Bon, I detect in there.
Yeah, right.
So just tell me,
Just a rough sketch.
yes.
So, first of all, these people worship a mountain goddess. That's the most important deity. I mean, they may be Tibetan Buddhists, and they have been Tibetan Buddhists for about 400 or 500 years. But they still revere this animistic past of theirs, older than Buddhism, right? And this goddess, to them, looks after their very woman-centric society. And you dig a little bit deeper, they are matrilineal. Families are totally matrilineal, and they are matriarchal. And so it makes sense, like, to keep the worship of a goddess, right? Because they still have, I mean, quite a lot of this woman-centric world, even believing in Tibetan Buddhism, right? Yeah.
Do we know where they came from? I mean, they're categorized as Nakshi people, which I think that's disputed. Yeah. I think it's not just that they were disputed. I think also anthropologists
That's
disputed.
right. I mean, they share some words in their language, you know. Nasi being the tribe in Lijiang, which is a very touristic place. I think they themselves, their own myths, they believe that they came from north of the Lubuk Lake, somewhere in the high mountains.
But we don't know how far north or when or...
No, we don't know when. But I think it's at least a millennia old, you know. And And then they settle around this beautiful lake. I mean, Google Lake is really beautiful alpine countryside. And they just live in their pockets. There are no more than 100 or 200 people in each little hamlet, all studded around the lake and a bit further inland.
And
in
there
the
are
high mountains.
40,000 of them still.
30, I think.
30.
Yeah. And they've kept up this tradition of matrilineage and matriarchy all these years.
So we're going to go into
Yes.
that, but I gather that there is a Mosuo group on the other side of the lake who did not.
Yes.
How did that happen? Why?
You see, the Mosuo came into history when Genghis Khan conquered, the first place they conquered of old China then was Yunnan province, which is where this lake is. And from Yunnan then his troops sort of moved eastwards and then conquered eventually the rest of China. But Yunnan was his first stop. And he stopped in a plateau near to the lake. And I've gone there and looked at it because there's nothing left. But his 500,000 troops settled there. And there's one little reference I found in another book somewhere, that the Mosuo at first, they saw a few troops on horseback coming through the mountain paths. And they said, oh, we must protect our land, right? So these farmers took, their hoe and their spade and, a few knives from the kitchen, and they stood there, like 150 of them, and wanted to protect their land, right? And 100,000 more troops came through the paths, right? And they said, what do you need? Do you need rice? Or potatoes?
Can I dig anything for you?
That's right. And anyway, they passed through the area. So that's the first time we sort of hear about them. I think they were so cut off that no outsiders came around, So, and then they passed from history again. Nobody heard of them again. And they managed to keep this belief of theirs. Now, to answer the question about
The group on the other side of the lake.
yes, on the other side of the lake, who are not matriarchal.
Yeah.
The Mongols came, and then eventually they were conquered by the Ming dynasty, right? And so the Mongol soldiers who were in charge of all this area, some of them sort of stayed behind. They didn't run away or something, and they sort of married with Mosuo women, but being Mongols and being, aggressive. They then converted that part of the Mosuo community to a very patriarchal way of life. And so, in fact, this subgroup of Mosuos now don't call themselves Mosuos, but they call themselves Mongol.
Right.
So you have like two groups
branches.
Yes, and these are Mongols and these are Mosuo.
And the Mosuo language, which I know has not been written down traditionally, but what's that related to? Is that a clue as to where they came from?
Well, they have analyzed it to be a Turkic Burman language. Whatever that means. That means that at least they're from Central Asia.
They come up from south rather than down from the north.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And in my book, I talk about genetic tests I did on both a man and a woman, brother and sister. So the woman's genealogy back to in history is Central Asian. Of course, the man's genealogy is more interesting because his genes seem to suggest Viking blood. I don't know how that.
They got around too.
I know.
Mostly not into landlocked countries.
Through the rivers.
Simply.
Yes, they're Vikings.
Yeah. How interesting. So there they are, this relatively in this very hard to reach place. There's an account by Joseph Rock. You may know was a plant collector, wrote for National Geographic in the 20s and 30s. And he gets there from Lijiang. It takes him 11 days with a train of donkeys and a compulsory consignment of soldiers who he had to take with him. You did it slightly faster than that.
And not as grand, because his entourage was like 30 people.
Indeed it was, but he was going the slow way. He needed the cooks and all of that. And he did know that they were matriarchal and matrilineal, but he didn't make a big deal of it.
He was more in love with Nasi.
He was more interested in other things. So in your rather more direct drive along a by now made-up road from Lijiang to the lake, there was clearly, the outside world was beginning to arrive, but still this culture was intact. So just tell us what it means to be matrilineal and matriarchal. These are not the same thing, but in this case, both.
Yes.
So what that means in terms of property, in terms of status, in terms of what jobs people do around the place. What does it mean?
Well, let's start with the matrilineal part first. We are all used to nuclear family structure, right? Man marries a woman, they have children, they form a family, and it goes on and on, right? When you look at the Mosuo family, although they're not all like that now, but the traditional Mosuo family are just made up of people who share the same female bloodline. That means matrilineal, right? What does it mean? It's easy to break it down into 3 generations, right? So the head of the household is a female because we're talking about matrilineage, right? So she's the grandmother. And she has children, both daughters and sons. They are understood by them to also have her bloodline. So that's her immediate family, all her children, women and men. And then you get to the next generation. You only count the babies of her daughters, because only women can pass on the female bloodline. So you have grandma, her daughters and sons, and the daughters and sons of her daughters only. And missing from all of this in the 3 generations are the male factor of the babies produced by the women, right? Because male lovers, I think I want to use the Mosuo word, which is Asia, which sounds more romantic, right? Male Asias. Hear me going on with my nonsense again. Right? Male Asias are never part of that family because in his bloodline runs his mother and his grandmother's female line. So he doesn't belong to the woman who has now born his child, right? So he doesn't belong to this very strictly woman-centric female bloodline family. He's an outsider, and he will always remain an outsider.
But he remains in his mother's house.
Yes, because he belongs to another female bloodline, his mother's, and you don't cross over because you don't belong to each other's family. And it goes on and on and on. And each matrilineal family follows the home name of the grandmother. You have a home name like our surname, which is our father's, right? This is the location of the home or the name of an ancient female ancestor or something. It's the same name that's been carried on. And their names actually have 6 syllables to it. So the first 2 are the home name, and then the native name, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So you look at the identity card of the Mosuo, it's the longest. Chinese people have 3 characters, they have 6. And so you immediately know that they're Mosuo because it's like the longest name. So that's the matrilineal part of it. And then we go to the matriarchal part. Because I think it's related to matrilineage, but more than the bloodline, the woman's place is the most important place in that family, and therefore in that society. So grandma is boss. She is, I say in the book, CEO of the family, right? Now her brothers might live with her, okay? And a brother would be the grand-uncle of this large family, right? He's at best CFO, if not lower, because he's not as important. I mean, if you look at some of the symbolisms they use, right? In a Mosuo house, in the room that grandmother sleeps in, it's the same room that functions as the living room, the kitchen, her bedroom, and the social living room, and so on. There are 2 pine pillars holding up the house. And what they do is they go to the forest and cut a really tall pine log. And the bottom, heavier, thicker part on the left side of the room is the female pillar. The stronger, the more important part. And then the top half, smaller, okay, forms the male pillar. And so the room actually has 2 sides, the female side, the more important pillar, and then the male side, the secondary side. All the symbolism actually just confirms the fact that the woman has a central place in that society. I love that, the symbolism.
So when a Muslim girl becomes a woman, so in her, I guess, early teens, she's then given her own room. And this was one of the aspects of Muslim life which, of course, attracts attention in the world we live in. She is then free to receive lovers as she chooses, without a commitment to a long-term relationship, or without the expectation that any children born of that would have a relationship with their father.
Yeah, this is the love part of the book, right? Life, love, and death. Yeah, and this is the most intriguing part to most of us. Because of the family structure, you don't need the male Asia to be part of whatever. And so there's no need, I think, for any permanent pairing up. And I think being a sort of hedonistically, or maybe it's not even hedonism, it's the naturalism of, okay, I need a man to give me a baby so that I can have a baby, right? And the baby belongs to us, the female side, right? So I would choose a nice, strong-looking, kind of handsome man because I want my kids to look good, be healthy, right? And anyway, he doesn't matter after that, does he? You know, in that perspective, really. Actually, come to think of it, there are lessons there for us, but and so their society doesn't need this pairing up. So, and there doesn't need this permanence part to it.
Because they've taken dependency out of it.
Yes, and the need to form something that endures, you know. So maybe that baby didn't turn out that beautiful, you know. I better look for another more handsome guy, you know, and so on. And their society doesn't frown on any of that, because love, I really think love is quite a free and natural thing. You know, it's viewed that way. And so they just choose their partners. Maybe he actually turns out to help me produce quite a nice looking baby. Maybe I'll keep him for the next ovulation, you know, I don't know, you know what I mean? So sometimes it's the same male Asia, and in the old days, oftentimes it's not the same male Asia. I mean, a woman could have, and I knew a woman, she has died since. She had 5 children, and 4 different Asias in her lifetime. to produce a factory. So she kept one second year ago. That's it, dump it, find next. And on the other side of the coin, I mean the men too, not having any real responsibility unless he chooses it to be responsible to this union or to this child. And they too, I mean, they survey the village houses and check out different women, you know. And the way they conduct this free love is that, first of all, the poor grandmother has to think like, how many women do I have in my house? Let me think. This generation has 6, and further down, maybe 3 more. I have to build 9 separate rooms for each of the women, you know, because they're going to entertain themselves, right, in privacy. Right? So Mosuo house is actually quite big, and they have all these little rooms on the 2nd floor of a wing, you know, and you know, you walk into a very poor Mosuo home, and yet there are like multiple rooms, because each woman has to have her own flower chamber, you know. And it's very simple. It's just a bed, a table, and some tea making things, and that's where she meets her lover, because the rule is the man walks over to the woman's room. You know, that tryst doesn't occur in his home, because his home, he has sisters who also are entertaining them in ourselves, right? So they call it a walking marriage, because the man walks over, probably after dinner at night, and then stays with her. But then he has to walk back to his grandmother's home, because he belongs there, and he has to work the field and, you know, construct the new kitchen or something. And so that's the division of labor. Like the women control the economic unit of the matrilineal family. You know, land has to be farmed, domesticated animals have to be, you know, bred, and so on. And then the men, the brothers and the uncles, they have to do all the heavy work around. And they may have to, in the old days, go hunting for additional food sources, you know. So that's how the game of love is played out. And in the society, anything goes, and there's no fixed arrangement that you need to observe. So some people have one asya all her life, right? Some just go on changing asyas, and so on, right? But that is, it's fine, you know, and everybody sort of doesn't make a big show even if they know who's going with whom. And nobody sort of acknowledges. It's quite a private thing between consenting adults, and they don't talk about love, lovers, or sex, right? In mixed company, it's really quite strict, a social rule, you know.
So how much socializing goes on outside in daily life?
Oh, there's no restriction at all. I mean, both genders meet openly in the marketplace. They used to have they used to meet at the local hot spring. There's a hot spring, and that's where a lot of first dates happen.
But they wouldn't then act as couples.
No, they don't. They don't, and they never walk around. Even today, whereas a lot of things have changed, right? Even long-term couples, right? They don't act like a couple. I talk about this because, I mean, it bothers me, this whole coupledom thing, you know, around the world. I mean, if you're not part of a couple, I mean, how many times have I felt that out of place because I go to functions all alone, you know? And then couples, actually, not all, but couples also do this couple thing in public to sort of, I think, embarrass those of us who are not part of the couple, you know. I mean, there's a lot of coupledom. Yes, you know, I mean.
But not in the music.
No, not at all. And, you know, you will never know who's partner.
Right. That one could imagine could lead to problems. You describe these relatively small communities dotted around the lake. people presumably look for partners beyond their immediate village. But nevertheless, if you're not entirely clear about the paternity of any group of children, doesn't that lead to genetic problems working through in some way?
It's actually quite interesting how they, I think, have managed it. I mean, not scientifically or anything, but
most societies manage it by having strict taboos on who you're allowed to.
Yeah, right. Because like my sister might know who I've been seeing, or my mom actually, if over time, might know who it is, right? And so like my kid, if she sort of is making eyes at the boy next door, but then I know that my brother has slept with the mother, you know, or something, right? Grandma or mom will sort of pull the young daughter aside to say, you know, it's really not a good idea for you to go with the boy next door. And they don't have to say any more than that because that's understood. Now, if it's a boy, right, since you can't talk about sex in the family, intergender, right? So the uncle, the grand uncle, will then pull the boy out to say, I know she's pretty in the next village, but you really don't want to make her your xiao. It's just not a good idea. So that's how they manage it, if they know. But then sometimes if you have more than one xiao, I guess you don't even know the paternity, but you kind of suspect. So I think there must have been ancestral mistakes, you know, along the way. It's just that I think there have been no studies on how big that problem is.
But those grandmothers must keep a very complicated social map in their heads.
You know, they're so clever that being illiterate, they know every phone number of all the multiple friends. So I think they probably have a good computer out there. I don't know. I mean, this is an interesting topic. Some sociologists should look into it.
So let's talk about men now. What it's like being a man in this society.
So the man is not that important. Remember, he's not part of my family. And I don't think I would say that the men are an oppressed second gender, but his place in traditional Mosuo society is a bit lesser than the woman.
In status,
in status, yeah. And don't forget he has a smaller pillar in the house too.
A smaller pillar and no property.
And no property. Well, actually that's also changing, but in the old days, the land just passes on to the matrilineal family, right? And it's a shared property, and he has no rights to children. So he basically, I think, is the muscle man and the stud around the place. I mean, that's his role. And I think he's quite happy doing both those jobs, you know, I think.
But there's a child rearing function for the uncles, is there not, in the family? I mean, the children don't grow up without male.
Yeah, okay, as an uncle,
yeah,
you have to look after your sister's kids, you know, they're girls and boys, right? So, you take them hunting, you teach them some hunting skills, some fishing skills, you teach them what's good manners, you must always respect your elders and all that. So they do have a male influencing role, you know. Of course, mothers and grandmothers have the same, but they have managed to sort of build the man up to the kids to say, you better respect your uncles because, you know, what it says goes, you know, sort of. So they have this schooling and educating role in the home of their nieces and nephews, not of their own progeny somewhere else.
but they seem like a relatively contented.
Yeah, I think they're quite happy, lucky going male species. I mean, you know, they get quite a lot of women in their lives, different women. Some of them actually do go and look at their kids now and then, like a New Year or something, bring a present. But anything goes, any arrangement goes. You don't have to care about, you can ignore the child or this woman you've been seeing last year, you can ignore him altogether. You can now and then, acknowledge your child and say, oh well, I've got a present for you or something, I'm sorry your father. Although that word in Mosuo, abu, is not a very important family relation, to them. Or you can actually sort of act like a male figure in that child's life, if you choose. But you can choose. Nobody is going to impose any rule on that.
Because the implications of these arrangements are really profound. I mean, are we to suppose this is a society in which jealousy doesn't exist, for instance?
I think they would say that that is true in telling stories about themselves, right? But I think
From your observation, would you say it was true?
Yeah, I think there is jealousy, but the jealousy is not backed up by a social system that punishes the transgression or something. You can be jealous and then maybe the guy doesn't like you to be jealous and he just will come and visit you or something. I think jealousy is probably a human trait. I mean, even our pets, our dogs can get jealous, right? We like another dog or something. But there's just there are not so serious consequences out of it. I mean, your jealousy could lead to a divorce or something, whatever. But it's a different rules. It's a different game.
So going back to your house, your £5,000 house, which is built in this lovely place, you slowly settled in, bringing lots of home comforts from Singapore, if I remember right. Why? What was the relationship then? There you were, you built your house, you're an affluent corporate lawyer from international jet-setting figure in this village. It does seem like a kind of, there has to be a bit of a gulf between you and people whose language you're only just learning Mandarin, and they don't speak Guangdonghua, I'm sure. How did this relationship work?
I mean, I don't bring that corporate lawyer jet-setting persona with me there. I mean,
that's left back in the apartment.
That's right. So I go there as just somebody in hiking clothes, right? So that's all I wear. And it's so cold, And I just sort of live in this house, and I visit my friends, which grew to be more and more all the time, right? And they just think that, okay, there's this Singaporean person, and she comes around, and I think actually some of my real friends are very they feel very privileged to be my friend, and they sort of parade that around. Thank you, but they just, and then I think after a while I did say, I'm going to write a book about you guys, right? So, I'm sort of like a presence that appears more and more among them, and I didn't do very much. I didn't even get a notebook and a pen because I don't want to be seen that, recording something. So I just hang around, I think, and if there's a party, I get invited, and then, they dress me up in a local costume because that's the way you attend a party, right? So half the time I'm like wearing this heavy headdress and this cinched waist and this long skirt, and I learn how to dance that dance. They're very happy that whenever the music starts, right, I'm there with them doing the circle dance, and so I think I just sort of glided into the community, I think.
No uncomfortable moments, no moments when you thought, what am I doing here?
No.
Or when they thought, what are you doing here?
No, they're good at
just taking it as it goes.
and just showing you the happy face, you know what I mean? Yeah, I think so. And then, I go to their homes a lot of I think that's a trick to sort of working yourself into a community. You don't bring inside the door your own judgments, your own standards of hygiene, your own, the standards of cuisine or something. You just go with the flow. I mean, my good friend Yvonne and her husband came to visit. And I brought them to, dinner is by the fireplace, cooked, on that fire, and a few dishes may be set out there, right? And there will be this bony chicken, it's because it's organic, right? Organically, but it's tough. And so Yvonne's husband, couldn't really bite into that hard piece of chicken, and then he just sort of slid it under the table for the cat, So I think I have heard them say to me more than once that they accept me is because I never bring my city ways with me and judge them vis-a-vis those standards. If it's dirty, I'll just close my eyes and eat it or something. I think that's the trick. To just do as they do, and not say, ooh, this is right, that kind of thing.
But clearly, if this had not been such an unusual society, would you have stayed? Because it was a beautiful place, or?
No, I think it's their story and this whole matrilineal, matriarchal, and seeing how women move in that society. That was the thing that made me stay again.
And made you think about your own culture.
Right.
Your own
and
upbringing.
you think about them as well.
Yes.
Because after a few years, I realized a lot of things were changing for them as well.
Yes, I really want to talk about that, because you go there in 2008, there's already a road from Newtown, but over the years, that road is upgraded, it's now
it's a spanking new
huge,
highway.
spanking double, right?
Yeah, and they exploded through the mountains, and the highway goes through tunnels.
So you're there in minutes.
And the new airport is just opened.
And there's an airport. And now the impact of that, and the fact that this society has a certain kind of notoriety in China because
of the love life.
Because of the walking marriages.
Right.
So very large numbers of people start to arrive in the movement. Now how is that going? Because it doesn't seem to be an entirely happy.
No, I think it's an invasion. Yeah. I would say the outside Han patriarchal world, the Chinese culture, has now invaded Lugule and the Mosuos in a big way. Just in the short 7 years I have been going, every time I go back, every few months, you see more evidence of the many assets and many aspects of patriarchal life or modern, city life, sort of making an appearance, and the Mosuo is actually adopting some of that and adopting more of that, I'll call that chapter, the last chapter, on the knife edge of extinction, and I think even today I see that, there's no number to it, but like half of the things I saw 7 years ago are not being kept up today. They've given up.
You're talking about traditions and customs and culture.
Right. It's like not ever getting married and just having walking marriages, right? The young Muslims are getting married by the dozens. All my young friends are getting married.
Because they think it's the smart thing to do.
It's a cool thing to do. Everybody else does it. I think I do it, So I've attended so many weddings in the last couple of years.
This must be causing some distress to the grandmothers.
No, I think the Mosuo are quite accepting, non-judgmental people generally. So they just, if the kids want to do it, they do. I would ask, there was a Mosuo couple, both a woman and a man Mosuo, right? having this long tradition of walking marriage, they got married, and I'm quite good friends with them. And I said, oh, why do you get married? You know, I mean, why don't you just do the walking marriage thing? And they both said, oh well, it's nicer this way thing, but yeah, we like it or something. I mean, not a deeply thought response, but it's an attractive thing to them, it seems, you know.
But there is a concern about a culture simply being commodified in this way, because the first people set up brothels because a lot of men arrived thinking, hey, we'll get through sex. Villagers who now dance every night for tourist groups, which is simply commodification.
Yeah, right.
And meanwhile, you describe these festivals, these more perhaps profound cultural events that just don't happen anymore because the way of life is being dignified. And are there people within the community who feel that's right?
Yeah, very few. It's a tiny minority. Like, there's only this man who runs the Goddess Festival every year. Right? He is like a single warrior trying to save the traditional customs and practices, and goes around to the school to teach them Mosuo dance or tell stories. But he's like the only voice that I know, trying to like save this dying culture. A few sort of more deep-thinking people might say, well, yeah, we see that it's changing and maybe we won't have a Mosuo culture in 20 years or something. But in the main, I don't think they know that they themselves are disappearing, you know. I think that's probably like, I would say it's not uncommon because most of the time, you know, cultural changes just happen, right? I mean, we just think, oh, it's just me deciding to do something different. And then 50 more people do the same thing and then it changes. You know, people don't stop to think about it. That's right.
But do you think it was inevitable? Do you think that
Yeah,
it
I
could
think
only be
once-
maintained in isolation?
Yeah, I think so. I think the weight of the modern world, the weight of the old agrarian society becoming plugged into the cash economy.
Sure.
All of these things, right? And then on TV seeing how other people live in the Chinese cities and, you know, obviously with more comforts than they have.
Sure.
I mean, all of this, I think it's a weight that no small tribe can withstand, I think. You know? I think so. And then in 30 years' time, they will try to revive a dead language or a dead custom or something, you know, and then it's probably too late.